Okay. Today's episode has a very interesting intro. Three friends from the ancient Sufi tradition back in the day are walking in the town and they see a giant wall that never was there before. They see this unique giant wall, and in some sense they're walking on the side of this giant wall, and as they're going, they suddenly, one of the friends notices a ladder, a giant ladder that takes, like this ladder that takes up this, like, relatively high wall. The friends stop at this ladder by this wall, and one of the friends goes up and the other two stay down to see what happens. And the first one goes up and goes on top of the ladder, and without a second of delay, he just jumps into the other side. He sees what's on the other side. There's like a millisecond of pause, and the dude's jumped in. And the two friends are like, yo, that guy totally left. He's no longer on top of the wall. And so the second friend is like, I'm going to go check this out. And the second friend climbs the ladder up the wall, and he's there up the wall. And what he sees is magnificent. He, in some sense, sees the Garden of Paradise. He sees heaven, a divine field in some sense. And so, because he sees the Garden of Paradise, he sees the first friend jumped in, and in some sense, the second friend's like, I'm going to feel a bit guilty if I don't tell, in some sense, the third friend. So he looks at the third friend down the wall and he says, hey man, the Garden of Paradise is here, and he jumps in. The third friend is stunned. He's shocked. As if what could possibly, like, there's no way the Garden of Paradise could be on the other side of this wall. And the third friend climbs. He finds his feet at the top of the wall. The third friend sees the Garden of Paradise. An incredible feeling overwhelms him. It's as if his conscience is telling him, enter, your lifetime is finished. You have entered the garden. You have found the heaven. And something in this man makes him climb down the ladder. And in that moment where before even he's climbed down, he's looking at the Garden of Paradise, and he shouts to himself. He shouts to himself as if it's the command of his heartbeat. And he says, the Garden of Paradise is here. The world should know. And the man returns. And so my attempt with the title of this talk is to, in some sense, point a light on the notion that there's many human beings that live on this planet, and the way they live, their lives lead to specific subjective patterns. Many of these subjective patterns are forgotten, but the only way they are kept is if they are in some sense returned to the central intelligence of the tribe. You see, the world, the issue is it appeared dishonest first. And what I mean by it appeared dishonest, the subjective realm occurred through a sort of artificialness, as if we were aware we were not our thoughts, before we had them. For me in this life, I could tell you I've transited through innumerable beliefs. Innumerable times I've had moments in this life where I have held language like a sword and shield of my identity. People have challenged me, and in some sense, words kind of sprang into motion from my mind. People didn't challenge me, I challenged myself again. It had to do with words, and pretty much I was like, okay, just like how we see a person is on their phone all the time, similarly I realize I am in the linguistic simulation all the time. I am constantly thinking of my life in sentences, and even, how can I tell you, it's as if of course everybody breathes like an artist. What I'm trying to say is that our eyes generate many, many canvases, many ways that the world is interpreted. However, if we identify by what we're passing through, it's as if the person is going through a dark tunnel, and rather than continuing his journey, he still feels like that moment in the tunnel is all of reality. You know, there are certain kind of not native, these kind of like really far away from civilization kind of tribes, where in the tribe the kind of the belief system acknowledged that the child must be in darkness till the age of 18. So the child would be kept in a dark room, and everything it would be taught would be kept in a dark room. And it's kind of strange, but as if the child, its consciousness would dwell in darkness for like 20 years before it kind of really saw the light of the world. The same way this can be explained is like as if some child living in an underground city, and the only dream of the child is to see what the myth of the sky looks like. The child leaves the cave and eventually sees the sky. I mean, of course, this is very similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, kind of like your eyes have opened, you're seeing something, and what reason do you have to see something else? What reason is there for ambition? You know? What reason is there for ideas of the future? The beautiful thing about a lot of life's major problems that influence all beings, you know, is that they don't have simple answers, and that's a good thing. The reason it's a good thing is because it requires a new built-up of strength. And what that means is sometimes individual problems can get instantly handled through a collective view. What that means is, imagine there's a person who cannot live, they're having issues with their living, and suddenly like their family comes and supports them, you know. Now imagine there's a family that has issues with living, and suddenly the community comes and supports them. Now imagine the community has a problem with living, and then the government comes in to support them. And then the government has a problem with kind of, in some sense, how to run the show. And in some sense, then there comes another force. And I feel this is the humorous thing, that if our egos are hallucinations of nature, or holographic projections in some sense, if the thought of ourselves is empty, what does that say about, in some sense, the body? If the person can say, I had this thought yesterday, that thought the day before, you see, it's as if the person doesn't have thoughts. The person, this is the hilarious thing, your body moves in a world, and in some sense, your mind is like how a world moves in your body. And this world is the subjective life, something many people don't acknowledge. This is why many people can get angry by language very easily. Any human being that can get angry, this is even known in advanced intellectual circles, the person who gets angry first, in some sense, their intelligence has not found a way to acknowledge the situation in a better, efficient way. As if like the first person to get angry in the room has the weakest mind. It could be the most strongest person in the room, but if that person gets angry quickest, that means rather than trying to see other dimensions, they have just been limited to one dimension, and the person gets angry. I find life is very fascinating. It's as if the meaning doesn't appear unless you look at it. You know, what that means is like the person is trying to put on a hat, but the person in some sense, I mean, this is going to be hilarious. It's like, this is extremely hilarious, but imagine a young child who hasn't learned what a head is. You know, their head is the word head, you know, H-E-A-D. And the person, because they haven't understood like that kind of an anatomical kind of like term, they see it's what it's as if the person, if they give them a hat and tell them put this hat on your head, because the person does not have the image behind the word head, for example, so in some sense the person cannot. And I don't know why I found that humorous, but I shared it anyways. There's I want to tell you this: the world is coming into view. When you take this mentality, suddenly life and death transitions into, rather than being something, some process where you're born into and you die, it's kind of like some process that you wake up into, and then you sleep out of. Do you know? It's as if this is why there's the term rest in peace. When a warrior would die in battle, you know, all his kind of comrades would kind of stand there, and they would just have a moment of silence to acknowledge the presence of that being in all their memories. Sometimes this world doesn't need to be saved, it just needs to be acknowledged properly. And that means there's a kind of inner responsibility and an outer responsibility for the collective. So some people would be like, what do you mean an inner responsibility for the collective? I mean, you see, because you are like imagine every person has a sphere around them. With a sphere, you know, that in some sense, at its core is like a glass sphere. It's transparent. But they have this sphere around them, and wherever this sphere whatever surface this sphere rolls on, it gets defined. You know? It's as if like when you're on Earth, you're an earthly being. When you're on a moon, you're a being from the moon in some sense. You're getting the same experiences. At the beautiful thing about data, this is the kind of unique divineness that the secular mind and the scientific mindset has access to, and science is not taking advantage of it. Science is explaining the world without telling the child why it's explaining it to it, what the vision of the whole thing is. And so, of course, the wonders of technology will inspire the, average child towards science, but science has not understood its value. I'm telling you, scientists, they can't be role models for civilization, because their approach is as if like you can't use a spoon to fix a car engine. You have to have the right equipment. And when science, in some sense, is provided, the data from science is given to a human being who requires a narrative to their life. You see, the health of a person has to do with the story they're telling themselves. Simply it. I'll tell you something fascinating. I believe, I'm saying this, of course, through a playful context, but hear me out. I believe in a sort of magic. Okay, let me explain this magic. This is not the magic of like the magician on the talent show kind of trying to show his skills. This is not the magic of like the esoteric people who thought they could use magic to manipulate things. This magic has to do with how an evolving creature, as it is opening its eyes, it is being bombarded by waves of data. in many subtle ways. Like some of those waves of data you can't see. Imagine like your Wi-Fi signal, you know? It's passing through you right now, but you don't even realize it. I'm telling you, it's like I hope technology never gets into our heads, and I mean that literally. Because if it does, it will be an invasion. It would be as if the technological machine in your head, like in the future, it's kind of assumed. You see, technology has a trend of getting more and more intimate with the person. First, technology was a giant computer, you know. Then, then technology suddenly became more, as it evolved, it became something that got closer to the human being. So I want you to imagine how weird it would be if, like, let's say a blue colored goo, like some blob or something, like just imagine some jello. Wouldn't it be weird if there was a jello, like let's say you went on the yard and there was this giant cube of jello, okay? Just play along with me here. Imagine you went to your backyard and you saw a blue giant cube of jello, okay? And you're just standing there in your yard and you suddenly see this jello fall towards you, and you in some sense see this jello constantly get closer. First it was in the distance, now it has come closer. Then the jello starts, for example, climbing your leg, imagine. Do you know? And so what I'm trying to say is this is all playful because the Jello doesn't exist. None of this this is just a thought experiment I'm doing here. But the whole point of it is it's some phenomena that is getting closer. It's a system of intelligence outside of the free will of the human being that is coming into it in the disguise of in this disguise of like luxurious technology. So for me, I'm saying the war of man, like this is the hilarious thing. I don't know how many people have seen the movie Matrix, but there's an underlying theme in the movie Matrix of of a war between man and machines. The writers of the Matrix were ridiculously ahead of their time, you know. And of course, any science fiction kind of enthusiast can imagine how the world will eventually get to that point, because we see an image of ourselves in phenomena, objective phenomena. It's like this is the mystical riddle. You're not your body, you're not objects, and you're not subjects. So what could you be? It's as if you're not your body and you're not your thoughts. So what is there? Like that's the mystical position. Okay? So technology, first it was distant, then it became suddenly connected to our, like phones were in the hands of everybody. Even a young child nowadays has a phone. And many parents don't realize how their children, young, super young children, I'm talking about like 6-year-old, 7-year-old kids, like my 7-year-old cousin had like Angry Birds. He was playing nonstop, and my parents didn't care. And I went and I told my aunt, like, your child shouldn't be using the phone, you know. And my aunt didn't listen, and eventually, you know, he got big glasses. And so it's strange. It's strange. The technology kind of found its way in the hand into the hand of the person, and the person eventually, the symbiosis of a technological and digital life with a kind of organic biological life. You know, this is one paradigm the human mindset finds itself in 2019. We don't have only, it's as if, like, really, let's think of the worst case situations. You know, there are biological threats on this planet, there are digital threats on this planet, technological threats, you know. There is ideological threats on this planet. There is even emotional threats. An emotional threat is when life circumstances corner you as a being into only looping between certain emotions and thinking that's life. That's kind of like the decay of the personality, you know? And so true happiness is not conditional, it's unconditional. It's like if somebody asked you what kind of love is better, conditional love or unconditional love, you'll be like unconditional because conditional ends at some point. So because there's this sort of greater value for something that remains, it's as if seldom this is said, but the psychologist goes and tells the person who's having hard times expressing themselves, and there's like, hey, buddy, you got to release your inner child. Some psychologists have done that. Do you believe this? They've literally talked to people and said there's an inner child. And the blue collar working man's like, I don't have time for this, man. I gotta get to work. But the psychologist was like, there's an inner child and you gotta let this inner child be free. The psychologist has a point. The psychologist saying there was a moment in your childhood where you were disallowed and unauthorized to pursue a sort of behavior of your interest. And because that unauthorization was there early on in your childhood, you have denied ever approaching that sort of pattern. You see, for me, the day, believe it or not, has at first it had meaning to the story of humanity. After that, it transformed into these experience patterns. So every day I wake up, it's just like how that dude from the Matrix kind of saw those codes. For me, it's as if I've noticed direct experience administers. The attention is administered through direct experience, language is then imposed. So your attention acts as the space where matter is held. So one can say, now we're getting to the intro. After 20 minutes, we're getting to the intro. So the title of today's episode is Garden of Forgotten Beliefs. And so let us first visualize what a garden of belief is. So when a person goes into a garden, in my childhood, I was very blessed with the simple allowance to walk and water many gardens, you know. And so there's something very liberating about helping the world advance in some way. I don't know why. I think it's because on some level, subconsciously, the brain is generating the moment, so it feels it is the world. That's why we keep it till the end of time. The natural design is to live for life. You see, there's life here. This life, it cannot be given a value because the free will can do whatever it wants. So on some level, you see people and you see their bodies, but when you go and if you were to judge them based on their bodies, you would automatically offend them. So what that means is every impression you get from a person, you don't know who they are at first. Okay? So what that means is if you were to go to exactly tell them what you see, how would I say it? It's as if like the first impression of a person is never that person. In some sense, this world is so strangely designed that even though we are with companions and friends, and even the greatest extrovert, let's just imagine the most extroverted human being conceivable, imaginable, okay? This extroverted human being will eventually realize that much of the maintenance of the human body is done in isolation. For example, how you take care of the physical body, and what you do, the various actions you do. There's a lot of the attention of the waking state is going to maintenance of biology. Because it's going to the maintenance of biology, what that means is it must somehow create time. So how can someone create time for two actions? The only way is if somehow you do the action by doing the first action. So when I kind of do something, anything I do, for me, that action doesn't have value. It's like a point which has many intersections. It's like one point go many lines. It's like one line. Imagine we have like I don't know, 7 horizontal lines, and then the eighth line is a vertical line. What I'm trying to say is that um, I don't want to use the term two birds with one stone because that is automatically a very primitive idiom. You know, it's like I don't know who killed two birds with one stone. That's like that was probably a giant stone thrown on a bunch of birds who had no idea it was coming. Like, so for me, it's like let's move on from that metaphor. Here's the metaphor. If I ask you right now, what is the most efficient action a human being can do? You would see, or let me say, what is the most efficient solution a person can have? You will see the best solution is an instantaneous one, isn't it? That means imagine right now like a person wants $1 million, they go to the ATM and they see $1 million. Instantaneous, imagine. Okay? Something that instantaneously occurred. So one sees it's as if like there was a problem and the solution occurred instantaneously, so automatically there was no time wasted, so efficiency, the greatest efficiency is instantaneous. And this is also why Leonardo da Vinci says simplicity is the most ultimate sophistication. This instantaneity is very crucial because this same instantaneity is the true instruction given about any sort of enlightenment possible in this material plane. Any sort. It doesn't matter if it's the European sort of mindset of enlightenment, rationality will conquer the world, you know? Or whether it's in some sense the Eastern way of enlightenment, we're all going into God's embrace. Like seriously, the world is automatically being torn apart by stories, but at the same time, there's something here more than it transcends the language threshold. And of course, the instantaneity is the key. They asked Kabir, this like Indian sage, they asked him, they're like, yo, Kabir. He's like, what up? No, he probably didn't say that. He probably was like, you know, I have no idea. But anyways, like they asked Kabir, how long does it take to get enlightened? This like Indian yogi, illiterate yogi. They asked him like, how long does it take to get enlightened? And Kabir said, half of an instant. And his answer was like in that instant, like a supernova explosion of cognition. Because what he's trying to say is that your question is hollow, not the solution. Sometimes the wrong question finds you and it can occupy your life for a long time. You know? I am Mr. Within is kind of asking for the whole species to command themselves into a new wakefulness, into a new attention to the values of life and how they come and go and what is it that actually remains. You know, how can we say there is no notion of a soul so easily when our physical bodies, the cells change after like you know, every birthday candle you blow, your not only your the physical cells of your body change, but your ideological constitution changes in regards to the expansion and exposure to various ideas and experiences you've had. So you see, life is something where strangely, regardless of how good or bad it is you're always expanding because the experience is constantly entertaining novelty. That means your soul is kind of inspired by the new, so it can never be defined. What I'm trying to say is there's an instantaneity at work. There's another quote from Kabir where Kabir commands, literally the dude's shouting. Kabir commands to one of his disciples. And he says, disciple. He says, student. And the student says, yes. He says, student, tell me, what is God? And the student, in that moment, instantaneously says, the breath inside the breath. If you think about it, the breath inside your breath means the presence of the existence of what is keeping your biology. We have to befriend nature through ourselves, believe it or not. First, internally, you got to do it. You got to study your body. You know, for me, I was looking at a lot of, and of course, I don't know why, but it's the female demographic of Western society. You know, a lot of women are doing yoga, but they're not doing yoga in accordance to the context it was meant to. That means there's a lot of young, intelligent women who are doing yoga, but they're not doing it in the with an acknowledgement of why the action was there. People kinda take what they need and they continue. I find life is like that, you know? It's as if a very playful analogy came into my mind, as if hope was on its deathbed, and in some sense the world asked hope, are you going to die? And hope looked at, in some sense, the world and said, the soul of hope can never. It's as if life is too pure to be destroyed. It's just so simply here that the complexity cannot enslave it. Sometimes I ask myself, why was I born in 1991? Why was I born in this moment of history? Why was I not born 10,000 years ago, and why was I not born 10,000 years after 2019? And I kind of realized it's as if, believe it or not, we are kind of travelers in this world. And every person, as if they've already paid for a roller coaster ride, and their eyes open in this roller coaster ride. And so what I'm trying to say is that most people, they're trying to get somewhere. It's as if the future is being told to the person before they actually get a good look at what they presently, in the present moment, are. You know, you're sold the future. They're selling the future of children into uh, the enslavement of an employee, because children's fear is being manipulated for them to be pushed into a certain direction. This fear is automatic, you know, it's like there's nobody to blame in nature aside from nature. Sadi, Saadi. For me, this Sadie, this thing he has is in some sense, it's as if he's finding himself this great poet long ago, in a moment where he's saying this to his mother. And it's as if he's done certain sins and he's looking at his mother and he says, "Mother, forgive me, because all my sins are from you bringing me into this world." And there's this kind of Persian saying where they say, uh, like heaven is underneath the feet of all mothers. Something like that. What I'm trying to say is that the ultimate cause of the moment is a changeless awareness to change, and every moment reanimates endlessly until you wonder why the intelligence is here, and then a sort of a rhythmic abidance with the world that you're in kind of occurs. You see, it's as if it's like a sort of Rubik's Cube, this world. It's a Rubik's Cube based on the depth that the eyes, in some sense, can see. How quiet the mind can be in a world filled with many noises. How gentle the human can be in a jungle of violence. How strong-willed the warrior can be in the battle of eons. Sadie, I'm going to go into a quote. I just brought up a list of his quotes right now. And there's something I do in these talks, guys, where in some sense I call it a quote tunnel. And I just read a list of quotes from one certain author or poet or philosopher, and just to get a sense of how that person's mind kind of opened up to the world. We can never know the personality of the person, yet we can see through the way the words have come into position and in some sense how the being looked at the world. Sadie says, "Nothing is so good for an ignorant man as silence, and if he was sensible of this, he would not be ignorant." I see where he's coming from. Sadie says, "Have patience. All things are difficult before they become easy." Sadie says, "The bad fortune of the good turns their faces up to heaven. The good fortune of the bad bows their heads down to the earth." Wow. 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 Okay. Sadie says, "The best loved by God are those that are rich yet have the humility of the poor, and those that are poor and have the magnanimity of the rich." I mean, I guess I see where he's coming from. Sadie says, whenever you argue with another wiser than yourself, in order that others may admire your wisdom, they will discover your ignorance. Sadie says, a man is insensible to the relish of prosperity until he has tasted adversity. Oh, I totally agree. Sadie says, I fear God, and next to God I mostly fear them that fear him not. Sadie says, the rose and the thorn, and sorrow and gladness are linked together. Sadie says, O wise man, wash your hands of that friend who associates with your enemies. What an incredible sentence. Sadie says, whoever acquires knowledge but does not practice it as one who plows but does not sow. Sorry, I'll read that again. Whoever acquires knowledge but does not practice it is as one who plows but does not sow. So that's very important. You got to cultivate. This is a term I often use. You have to cultivate your intelligence, because it is not just like a snapshot belief thing. It's a moving thing. The world is alive. And as your attention pays attention to the world of life, it begins to, believe it or not, you remember the ways the unknown is keeping it. So how the Carl Jung has this thing. I'm going to say this here. Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life, and you will call it fate. Something like that. So what he's saying is, there's a call to action for the consciousness of the human being to wonder about what is unknown to it. So you, as a person, you're not fully a person unless you acknowledge what is known and what is unknown in the moment. You know? It's as if like you're holding a coin, but you've never turned it around. And it's as if you're giving this coin to someone without ever seeing the other side, and that is the transition of life, which can change. Anyways, the winds of evolution will push us all regardless of our beliefs. The belief of a person plays a tiny percentage in what is actually relevant to the experience being had on this planet. And even questions about the experiencer within. Anyways, let's continue with the Sadi quote tunnel. He says, it's no virtue to gain the whole world. Just gain the heart of one person. Okay, man's lonely. Sadi says, reveal not every secret you have to a friend, for how can you tell but that friend may hereafter become an enemy, and bring not all mischief you are able to upon an enemy, for he may one day become your friend. Incredible. This is saying, have no enemies, because those people who are your enemies change. What a unique statement. Anyways, of course, guys, this is a poet that was alive, I don't know, what is it, like 600 years ago or something? Like, he's held in a high light in Persian culture. Anyway, Sadi says, when the belly is empty, the body becomes spirit, and when it is full, the spirit becomes body. I totally agree with that. Let's move on. Sadi says, he who is a slave to his stomach seldom worships God. Man, this guy's hungry. Sadi says, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Okay, no, this is definitely not Sadi. Sandy says a garden is a delight to the eye and the soul, a solace for the soul. And this is the world. Technology it's a symbiosis. So living in society, you are, oh, believe it or not, living not with machines yet, but in a machine, in a sort of mechanism. Because if it does not repeat itself, it will never be identified. You see, how can in some sense, uh, imagine how would I say it, like, beliefs come and go. They're like lost technologies. However, every design in existence, the moment it has come into design, it echoes into many conscious levels. What that means is, like, the sound of that drill is not just entering my ears, but it is also entering the ears of the audience who listen to this. You see, it's as if on many levels the influence occurs. And this is the honest truth. Civilization has to walk the middle way. If we try to make it too good, it'll get boring, so the bad will be worshipped. If we make it too bad, it'll never have a chance to be good, so like it'll be boring too. It's as if, trust me, violence is the sign of an inferior mind. Let me tell you why. Because we've had it for like endless. Till the end of time, there's going to be violence. Let's at least live a bit peacefully, okay? Like, that's the suggestion. It's as if when we realize peace is the allowance for the global community's mind to open its wings. Do you know how many children right now, if they were given the world's problems, they could have something to say about it? And so society does not value people. It values their time. It values them like an energy, rather than the person working in their life in an environment where their intelligence is amplified. With whatever limited the intelligence they have, they are just taken as accepted as a cog in a machine. In some sense, I understand the value of capitalism. Okay, the headphones I have now, this laptop I'm using to communicate with the world, it's as if I can never hate capitalism. At the same time, any system that doesn't adjust to the level of change that the human being is experiencing will in some sense feel like a cage for the human being. So trust me, very intelligent people, it's like it has to do with the level of your boredom, okay? You see, a person who gets bored quick is a person who thinks they have figured it out. But when you authentically explore and then you still see nothing, that means the belief you are in some sense kept in a belief, and life is not constantly thinking about like deep ways about it. Life is just a sort of natural process where a part of this natural process has become aware of itself, and it's established itself linguistically as an idea, and because it could close its eyes and see itself, it in some sense invented a world in a world. So trust me, technology is not the first world in a world. Like, imagine if it was all a dream. That sentence always makes you feel like you're a rapper. I am saying, imagine a meteor was about to hit Earth, and we human beings asked one another, what was our humanity like before it was ended? Could we even see the world as it was? You see, you only fear what you feel exists but you can't see. That's why you fear. Life can move in many ways. We don't know how long we will be here. I treat this world as a pilot. My attention is just piloting throughout the day. As it pilots throughout the day, it will find moments where in incredible stillness and silence, it's as if an ever-present field of being is present, as if there is no notion of death or birth, because it's as if the person's birth becomes an idea for the ever-present mind. It becomes like the particle in the field of intelligence is not like the particle is intelligence, but its intelligence is not owned by it. It is owned by how the universal sector is kept in position. In some sense, like ancient Egyptians worshipped the sun. Can you imagine that? And I could totally imagine that. I could totally understand why they would do it, why you would make the sun a god, you know? Because it is what is opening the world in your eyes. This is why I find in religious texts light was a divine thing, because light illuminated, and illumination meant, in some sense, how can I tell you, lighting up more data. For me, it's just this, like, how can I tell you? We can have confusion behind closed doors. We can have people who feel they're doing something illuminated but are actually lost to a program. This world moves in many ways. Just like how many sounds enter your ear, there's many senses of self that can be imagined. Sadhguru, this wise mystic, I recommend people to check out his YouTube videos. I find that anything you want through life, don't define situations, simply live through them, and just eventually you'll tap into your own style. When I say your own style, this is very crucial. It means when you find a level of contentment with all phenomenology in the moment, including like it's as if like you suddenly realize what is present now is running the show. When you realize that, your mind, like literally any sort of identity or personality that you felt you were, breaks. It's as if before the child could fulfill its desire, the world broke its thoughts. And the child was left wondering, what can I do? And that's when life, in some sense, reminds you endlessly that because it's a changing world, novelty is the greatest thing. This is why I feel society must have a creative context behind it. It must not have, religion must not try to run society, and in some sense, technology must not try to run society. Society must be run by a creative atmosphere. It's like, why does a person become a neurologist? Because for them, the brain is the most unique organ in the body. Look at what it's creating. It's creating the person exploring the brain. We don't realize how fragile language is. This is why it's as if like you have to become aware of language. This is one of Mr. Within's great recommendations. Aldous Huxley. He says there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. For me, if somebody came and asked me, what do you think this whole world is, and they wanted my honest opinion, I would simply say that before I say anything, what if it's beyond language? When we realize there can be a truth beyond language, it's a chaotic moment. It's as if you have found a great wall which you have never seen behind. But some see that garden of paradise and return, and they are not people. I believe, like, this is a crazy thing, but I've had certain theories on this, that no person could ever get enlightened, you know, if it was like instructed in a text. Let me tell you why. Because enlightenment is the dissolution of the ideological personhood. It is a chaotic acknowledgement of emptiness, and suddenly the true data is gained access. You live a real life because you have really realized there's a sight here. You're a moment of intelligence, experience it. The world appears in many ways, yet what moves seems to be beyond appearance. It's as if suddenly I think, like, okay, like like imagine a thought comes that, like, there's a cup of coffee here, I take a sip from it. Right now I take a sip from a cup of coffee. The intention to pick up the cup is not a material phenomena for me, and I believe it is neither for everyone else. And for me, like, like, let me drink from this. Chung Tzu I am at a loss for words for the first time. Chung Tzu says, thoughts are like leaves on a tree. They change as the seasons come. When you acknowledge this, you kinda can no longer judge yourself, because the moment you judge yourself, tomorrow you'll wake up and just the dimension of novelty will change you. It's as if we don't need to just see the wilderness outside of our eyes. There's a sort of wilderness behind our eyes, which for most people comes down to their vision and their dreams, their ambitions. How all this data in the world is in some sense kept in a certain way. Life has an urge to communicate. It's as if matter's purpose was to generate sound. I believe our planet is creating a very unique sound from it, is echoing in outer space from the surface of the planet. Chuang Tzu spoke about a sort of cyclical relationship, or let's say a seasonal relationship with thought. But if you look at it more closely, it's an instantaneous, momentary relationship with thought. And for me, my attention dances, and it dances through various intentions in regards to how the world has been contemplated. Sometimes in this life, you gotta know when to listen. Sometimes you gotta know when to speak. Sometimes you gotta realize when to, in some sense, stop the dynamic and look again. Due to the nature of this cyclical relationship in this world, whether it is through inner seasons or outer seasons, there is change. So the leader must first acknowledge the change of circumstance. You have to get rid of your fears by acknowledging the true data that's there. An example of this is, for example, Elon Musk was afraid of the dark when he was a kid, and then he suddenly read about photons, and he's like, it's an absence of photons, nothing to worry about, and his psyche was calm, and he slept. You can say the pioneers of technology could really well prophesize how that technology would evolve to some degree. And I find that the moment has a sort of inventive quality. I'm trying to tell people, look at life through the eyes of a designer and an inventor. But this sense of invention is inspired out of the creativity of the moment. It can appear in many ways, but hold yourself in high regard, for why else would your eyes be open? There must occur a revaluing of the self and then a sincere abidance by how the world moves from there on. Sadi has this quote where he says, roam abroad in the world and take thy fill of its enjoyments before the day shall come when thou must quit it for good. He's pretty much saying, live life while you're alive. Don't just exist, live it. Whatever that means. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste. May the winds of evolution gracefully find us. Much blessings and namaste.